Welcome, everybody, to the show. One of these days, I got to fix that. I'll explain one of the reasons why I haven't fixed that at some point tonight. Welcome to the show. This is Counterclipping show number 180, 186 for August 19th, 2024. Correct, it's the 19th. It's been a long week already, and it's only Monday, so if you know what I mean. I ran a 2-hour training class at work today, so if my voice goes out, don't be completely shocked, but I got plenty of water here. So our topic is research versus mechanics, and I'll talk a little bit more about this as we get later into the show. We are once again drinking Mayor Pingree, which I want to make the shelf space for because I don't have that much shelf space here, at a luxurious 47%. Thank you, John Longshore. So we have... I'm puzzling over Tailwind's message in the chat here. TOM. That's not ringing a bell for me at this moment, but like I said, it's been a long week already. So, and Mr. Mark Herman playing Spotsylvania is already here, so that's fantastic. Oh, we're talking. Fucko here's talking about the new Clipper. I'm sure. I am at this point, of course, completely immune to such weakness, having been using this very Clipper or one exactly like it for basically forever. Thunder on the Mississippi, meandering Mike. Thank you. I should have recognized that. Where am I at here? So while I was prepping for the show, just like in the last 15 minutes or so, I actually ripped the back clean off this counter, tearing counters out of the sheets. I hardly ever do that, but for some reason, when I have done that, it has invariably been with one of Multiman's games, and I'm not sure why. I do know why on the other case. In this case, I think it was just clumsiness on my part. So, in any case, I don't really have any news tonight, so we're going to speed through that portion of the conversation. But in the meantime, let's remind everybody to like the video if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, or follow wherever you're at. Need to fix this. Okay, and we turn the banner on. Excellent. Okay, so like, comment, subscribe. There's a bunch of links in the video description to help the channel out in various ways, including, but not limited to, the Noble Knight affiliate link. I don't have a report for that this week for the latest campaign for Noble Knight store credit, but if you buy something from Noble Knight and you use my affiliate link, I get a wee kickback in the form of store credit, and it is much appreciated. But don't forget, everybody that's here and who comes, every week to hang out and chat and all that stuff is in fact supporting the channel, and I really do appreciate it. I want to give a special shout out to Eric S., who hopped in to support us at the hero level on the Patreon today. So thank you, Eric. That is much appreciated. I also figured out what the problem was with the card that plays, the end outro that plays at the end of regular videos. I actually had an old version of the file, so the patron card was not up to date, and I believe I have now fixed that by deleting the incorrect file. So also want to give out a shout out to our good friends at Noble Knight Games for being the official sponsor of the Counterclipping show, and we will be hearing from them later. I fixed this counter, by the way, just by using white glue. That's totally sufficient. It'll be fine. So, a couple people have mentioned that they got their 5th Frontier Wars. I got mine today. I haven't looked at it at all. I've got the PDF. I've had the PDF for months, of course, so I know what's in it. And I might do a video on it. We'll see. I'll talk about that tonight, too, because there's a whole bunch of stuff happening, and I'm way behind. I do want... we've got 3 links to share tonight, actually. The first of which is going to be to the Armchair Dragoons and Beyond Solitaire collaboration on the Solitaire Wargaming poll. So everybody, if you haven't answered the poll yet, please hop over and take a look at it, hopefully. I have thrown the link into the chat. Super chats and super stickers are on, so if it's a good way to support the channel, as well as a good way to get your comment highlighted so I don't miss it. I will definitely respond to any super chat or super sticker. It gets highlighted in my list of comments here. So this I have no explanation for at all, actually, unless I put the wrong link somewhere, which is not impossible. I'll have to look at that, but in the meantime, the video's up, and I'll talk about the upcoming video itinerary as well tonight, because I actually have some news on that. So, but before we go any further, where is my... There we go. Let's say hello to B. Atkins, Christoph de Klerk, Daniel Silverthorne, David Imperato, David Zell, Eric Goebel, Eric Schaefer, Gronyard Rich, Groucho Marx, HUN644 New, Iggy Crichtel, the legend himself, Fucko is here, Jason W., Jeff Beeler, Joe Perez is in the house, John Stanley, Jonathan Dyer, Kyle Harris, Lee Grant, Manders, Mark McNair, Mr. Mark Herman is of course here, Marty Sample is here, Marty, good to see you again, Meandering Mike, Molotov, Cockatiel, Perfidious Albion, Richard D. Fortuna, Scott Bell, Sean Sullivan, Stacky Limit, Tailwind, Todd Cox, and William Aarons, and I see Joe Okabayashi just popped in as well. Anybody else that I missed, I apologize. It is YouTube's fault. So thanks everybody for coming. I will throw up the campaign card just to give everybody an update of where we are, but there's no new information. So the current campaign for Noble Knight Store Credit is the campaign for the remaining SPI soapboxes that I can justify owning. There's a couple that I cannot because I have all the individual components, or at least all the individual components that I want, like the Star Force Trilogy, for example. I don't really need Star Soldier or another 4-inch box on the shelf. I'm good with Outreach and Star Force. So we have these 5. They will be rearranged as availability allows. And I am aware that one popped up on Facebook Concept Marketplace today, NATO Division Commander, for a very good price at that, but I don't have that much money. So that was simple. So we're using Noble Knight Store Credit for this kind of things. And Mr. John C. from the sunny Philippines, if I missed you, John, I'm so sorry. So actually, we do have a little bit of news today. The latest Blind Swords game from Revolution Games, which is Shiloh the First Day, has begun to ship. I don't have a link for it prepared ahead of time. I am roasting in here already. And if I open the door, we'll get cats, and I don't really want to be interrupted in that context. So, but game looks good. Not sure who the designer is. It's not Herman. And I'm not sure if it's Claude Whalen or not. Hexy's here. Thanks for stopping by. But I have all the Blind Swords games, all the Civil War Blind Swords main sequence games so far, except for the Devils to Pay. And I'll pick that up through Noble Knight at some point. I just haven't gotten around to it. It's not a huge priority. It doesn't fit on the shelf with everything else either. So I'm going to attack this question from a little bit of a different angle here, Jeff Beeler, although I can certainly see where this is coming from. I am talking strictly inside wargames. But Wardrobe is here as well. Thanks for stopping by. Jason W. points out that Steve Carey, who's another one of the Blind Swords design team, he's done at least one prior to that, is the designer of Shiloh. So, and it looks good. I will grab it sooner or later, but I may wait till after this month. Let me put it that way. I mentioned that the wife and I are on a spending freeze this month on anything that's not necessary, and more games are not necessary, but don't think that means no new games have arrived. Emphatically, that does not mean that. A couple things came in via pre-order, and like the Traveler book, for example, that I had paid for months and months ago. Was the other thing, and I got a trade for Knock Paris 1914, so thank you very much, Joe, for setting me up with that. So, I've got this huge wraparound monitor. It's one contiguous monitor throughout the entire front of the thing, and frankly, I think I'd rather have 2 or maybe even 3 separate monitors, because it's kind of easier to partition all your stuff onto separate monitors. As it is, I've kind of do a significant amount of window juggling. On the other hand, if I'm playing a video game, it's fabulous. Assuming it has ultra-wide monitor support, which they don't all. And, for example, Starfield did not when it came out. All right, so what do we got for news besides Shiloh the First Day and the Noble Knight campaign update? Neil Badke, thanks for stopping by. Professor Albion says research is about the depth of research on the historical topic as it applies to game design. Mechanics is the execution of procedures to describe the narrative of battle. I want to dissect this. I don't disagree with any of that, but I'm gonna try and dissect this a little bit and try and give us a cleaner divide between the two topics. Let me put it that way. So, video wall like Dr. Evil. That would be fantastic. My throat's already going. That typically means it's time for additional whiskey. So, in any case, let's see here. All right, war games are not necessary. Well, of course they are, John. I didn't say that. Did I say that? Because if I said that, then perhaps I've been replaced by a pod person of some kind. Clearly, I don't believe that to be the case. So there's a bit of like personal workflow type news that I was debating whether to do it at the end of the show or at the beginning, but I'll do it here. I have started a new YouTube channel because, hey, who doesn't need to run 3 YouTube channels? Who doesn't have that kind of time? So the new YouTube channel, it's not going to be like super duper high output, but it's going to hold stuff that's like movies and books and that kind of thing. So it is called Voyages into Imagination. If anybody wants to hop over there and give me a follow, I'm throwing the link to that in the chat as well. There's 2 videos up, one of which is embarrassingly bad, and for somebody who's been doing YouTube 15 years, there's not really a good excuse for that, but it just didn't turn out that well, and I didn't want to dump it because it was the only video I had. There's, I think, two like long-form videos and a couple of shorts, and don't expect more than 1 thing to appear a week on that channel. So I'm not sure if Jeff's talking about this or not. So actually, yeah, it's not technically a new YouTube channel. It's my personal, like old personal YouTube channel. That it's not. I never abandoned it. It was just that I would watch videos on that channel and not post anything. Well, why start another new channel? I'm just going to use that one, right? So it's not technically new, and there is a rather short wargame video on there already, which I, for some reason, didn't think to pull backstage, but it isn't technically new. So if anybody wants to give me a sub over there, I would appreciate it. So in any case, I will probably, and it's in the link tree already, and I'll probably do very little other than saying, hey, there's a video on the other channel, go check that out. It should get more content than the video game channel, which gets reliably somewhere between 2 and 5 videos a year. So in any case, I appreciate all the extra subscriptions. It is much appreciated. So I've already angered the Terry Goodkind fan base, but I'm okay with that. And lastly, we have the Tweezer Mafia t-shirts, which I'm going to throw a link to that in the chat as well if anybody wants one of those handsome devils. John Stanley, thank you so much. Much appreciated for the support. Carrier battles in 1942 is an interesting study in mechanics of a game and the research of how the battles were actually fought. History has shown the USN was not very good at coordinating attacks, certainly not in 1942. They got a little better at it, but there was some, as much as Pacific War games have tended to notice that there's friction on the Japanese side between the Japanese Imperial Army and the Japanese Imperial Navy. There was also friction on the U.S. side between Nimitz and MacArthur, as we know once we say it that way. So that may have contributed to the phenomenon that John Stanley is talking about. But I do think the U.S. Navy got better at that as time went on, as the war went on. And once again, we've missed a corner here somehow. I think it's these counters, because this doesn't, or it's this clipper. This doesn't normally happen very often. But thank you, John Stanley, for the support. Much appreciated. I've always done my repairs and stuff with white glue. It works fine. I mean, it's not like archival or anything, but who cares? I got games to play, not to stick in a museum somewhere. This is a good idea, and I actually did briefly have hoodies, and I was the one to order one, and it took 7 months to get there. For some reason, that never happens with t-shirts, but it did happen with the hoodies. It is something I probably ought to revisit at some point. So, there you go. Wait a minute, Mark. Wait a minute, Mark. Are we going to get Pacific War 2? That's my question. Is that going to be Pacific War 2? I'm guessing I know the answer, but in any case, MacArthur friction. I've been getting a lot of clips lately on TikTok from that MacArthur picture with Tommy Lee Jones as MacArthur. Is that any good? I'm pretty happy with Empire of the Sun all around, to be completely honest about it. But remember, it's a pretty high-level game. It's not going to show you every little noodly detail. So, okay, well, well, you could have some little Army/Marines friction going on there. I'm not sure if that's a huge factor or not. My guess would be no, other than the Marines' general annoyance that the Army arrived late. You know what? I actually pulled the entire merch store over this at one point, but I ended up going back because I didn't really have a better option than Spring, unfortunately. So, and I do like the t-shirts. The t-shirts are nice. And the mugs and the glasses are all nice. It was just for some reason sweaters or sweatshirts were some kind of problem. Maybe there was just a hiccup. So Mark clarifies that during Guadalcanal, Halsey and MacArthur got along well. Well, Halsey wasn't Nimitz either, but Nimitz wasn't there either, was he? So there's that. Vicky, thanks for stopping by. So there's that. What else do I have? So I've been trying to kind of organize the file system I use to keep video files organized in terms of I've got the intros and the outros and the various utility cards. Like sometimes I'll need a black card for some reason to do a fade. Try and put all those in the same folder so I don't have to run around looking for them. And I put all of the videos that are pending editing into a single folder. There's 15 videos in that folder. At least one of which needs to be done tomorrow or maybe Wednesday. No, it needs to be done tomorrow because that is the very special unboxing of The Last Gamble that you will see on Thursday. So there's that. Yeah, that's pretty much what I said. I mean, whatever Mark wants to do, just shut up. I'll give him, here's some money. So in any case, I'm happy to support whatever effort Mark wants to make at this point. So it's all good. I got it's so warm in here that the counters are sticking to my fingers. Out in the game room, it's like a meat locker. In here, it's very warm for some reason. Probably all the hot air and the computer is probably why. So, all right, what do I got? Do I have anything else? I'll talk about the actual upcoming videos that are already uploaded and ready to go toward the end of the show. In the meantime, it is 20 minutes in, so it's a pretty good time to get started on the topic where I can call that ahead of schedule. So this is the idea of research for, I got to like fit this on the thumbnail, right? So that's why the video is called what it is. But what I particularly want to call attention to, I mean, I think everybody would agree that fundamentally, I'm not sure you can do too much research, right? That I don't think there's a tension there. However, I do think that in terms of every designer or design team or company project team that's working on a game has a finite amount of man hours or person hours that they have available, right? So where they are choosing to spend that time is an important decision. And I do think it's possible to, and I've complained about this with Europa numerous times for, say, Order of Battle research, for example, to end up having an outsized impact on what the game actually plays like at the end of the day, right? Neil Badkey says, your brother was in the movie MacArthur when they filmed The Surrender. They called Navy personnel on any ships in port to be an extra. Oh, cool. That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. So, see, this is, and of course, Mark lasers into the exact point. What research is relevant to the design, right? These things, I feel like these two things kind of ought to happen kind of hand in hand, right? And not necessarily, I mean, there's going to be exceptions to the way I'm going to say this because there are some people like Mark who probably didn't necessarily need to do a ton of additional research when redoing Pacific War because he did all that research already and had continued to read on the subject since then. So if I'm misspeaking, Mark, please call me out. That's fine. But I'm guessing Mark was in a good place research-wise when he began the undertaking of redoing Pacific War, right? But that is a new edition of an older game, and the research was already done. The question that I think is the more interesting question for what I'm trying to get to here is, are you disadvantaging the game design because of some aspect that has come up in research that you feel you must include? To what extent can that get in the way of the game design? And of course, the case study here is literal Europa, right? Because we've got that huge, elaborate, and very well researched, generally for its day, Order of Battle that just keeps getting bigger with every subsequent game as they keep finding more and more little noodly details. Neil Bedke says they filmed on the New Jersey. Babel Board Game says when designing, he picks a period and then the mechanics. And I think Mark has expressed something very similar too. The design of the mechanics is going to be be informed, at least, by the research that you've done or the knowledge that you've already have, right? I mean, I don't know. Another good example of this would be The Last Gamble, right? How much additional research did Danny Parker need to do to revisit The Last Gamble, a game that had previously been designed but is substantially redesigned in this incarnation. This came up in my, I'm not sure it's going to make the edit, but this came up in my conversation with Danny, right? I feel like it's more important to have mechanics that accurately simulate or model the dynamics of the topic than it is to necessarily have a 100% airtight order of battle that you struggle with for sometimes decades, right? So Mark says that Pacific War research was broad but focused on China, as a lot of material has come out in English since 1985. I've found a little bit of that material, but not as much as I would like. Jeff Baylor says, how much does general research reading trigger a new wargame? I have found this to actually work both ways, to be completely honest about it. I sometimes find that I become interested in a wargame after reading about the topic, and I sometimes find that I become interested in reading about the topic after I've played a good wargame on it. Mark, once again, is the villain here, and I've told this story about For the People a bunch of times at this point, so I won't do it again. So, John Stanley says, question that historians have asked, was Palelu Nimitz's biggest mistake? Maybe. Maybe. I could see this. I don't consider myself well enough informed to have a big opinion on this. My default position is I blame MacArthur in most cases. So whenever something goes wrong in the Pacific, it was probably MacArthur's fault, unless it was the Japanese's fault. So which did occur a couple of times. So yeah, this is fair too, right? You've got these, the Bismarck did get a lucky shot in on the hood to blow it up, right? But I mean that it has happened in naval engagements that a magazine gets hit and the whole ship goes up, right? It's not like that the hood was the first time that had ever been recorded. So Jason W. quite correctly points out, I feel like this is something we might get into tonight, maybe, because I'm not sure if this will support an entire show as a topic. But the changes in the relationship between design and development, notice I said design and development and not designer and developer, because those could be the same thing, but not necessarily, because there are publishers that don't work on the traditional SPI style designer developer model, but like GMT still does, as far as anybody can tell. But that relationship is different now than it was in like 1978, right? Where you had in-house staffers working on this stuff and in-house playtesting and all that stuff. I'm sure some amount of in-house playtesting happens at every publisher. Aaron Dennis, thanks for stopping by. And Clark Commando 1983. Mark, thanks for stopping by. Hopefully you're doing okay. Mark Herman says that Gettysburg Waterloo Rebel Fury required a rethink on how a hex encounter game should examine early to mid 19th century warfare when it's all direct. Warfare is all direct fire, some howitzers and mortars, not much. Well, prior to like mass artillery barrages and stuff like that in the say World War I and forward sense. But a lot of the things that we saw first in World War I, in fact, occurred earlier in the U.S. Civil War, trench warfare, and so on and so forth. And we always appreciate the research, right? That's one of the reasons why something like Last Gamble is so impressive. And frankly, it's one of the reasons why Last Chance for Victory, Dean Essig's magisterial Gettysburg game, is as impressive as, I gotta figure out where this is, because the light in here is dreadful and I can't see the colored stripes on these particular units at all. I was so impressed with looking through the designer's notes and the depth of thought and research that had gone into that game. That's why I bought that game. So Jim Dix, thanks for stopping by. So you can get these from Amazon, or you can go directly to Oregon Laminations. This is the Oregon Laminations Corner Rounder. There are two different models. This is the regular version. This is the deluxe version. The deluxe version is prone to breakage. The non-deluxe version is not, but it's a little bit trickier to use, and you do need to practice with it a little, or at least be careful with it a little bit. The non-deluxe version is a little cheaper. There are actually more radius sizes available than 2mm, 2.5mm, and 3mm, but those are the ones that are useful for wargaming. I do have like a 10mm corner punch that's for scrapbooking that I bought from Michaels. It won't cut counters, but I'm not trying to cut counters at 10mm radius, or I'll end up with very bad counters. Vincenzo Beretta, thanks so much. Since the best game he played recently is Fire in the Lake, and one of the designers, Mr. Herman, is here, how much of the research was for Fire in the Lake was about the psychology of the various factions? I'd be very curious to know what the answer on this is. But don't forget that, you know, Volko's not here, so I would probably want to ask Volko that too. But Volko makes himself pretty available. He's along with Mark, is very generous with his time in this respect. Viridis Albion says post-war the Royal Navy learned their hard lessons and practiced safety to address flash ignition, thereby blowing up the entire ship. No kidding. The research in Last Gamble is extreme, as I think you'll see from both the components that you'll see on Thursday and the conversation. And I guess I'll warn you, this will be my longest unboxing video by a lot. But I think you'll see the depth of research and the decades of experience in doing that research that Danny has brought to that game. But nevertheless, right, you can point out examples, and, you know, again, Europa, but I could come up with other examples as well. Europa is to some extent a safe game to criticize because the people who currently are in charge of it are living in a cave somewhere in Colorado. And no human has heard from them in some years. So I'm not hugely afraid of hurting their feelings. And I have good things to say about Europa too, as far as the overall experience is concerned. But let's face it, it's a very clumsy game, and a big part of why it is such a clumsy game is because of that obsessive order of battle research that they then have to design the game to work around to get it to output reasonable results. And it does, but they have to use some pretty Byzantine rules to make that actually work, right? All right, Paul Grassmere, welcome back to the show. He was research librarian, several wargame designers working on modern warfare topics were Stonewalled and Flummox when FOIA, that's going to be Freedom of Information Act, for those not in the U.S., requesting material related to electronic warfare data. I'm not hugely surprised by this particular stumbling block. I'd love to be clipping The Last Gamble right now, but here we are with Utah Beach still, and I'm hoping to finish it tonight, but we'll see. I'm doing okay so far. I'm doing what I think is the 719th or 709th Infantry Division, and it's an enormous division. It's like a counter sheet and a half. In addition to the amazing depth of research on Last Gamble, I think everybody will be delighted with the map, although as long as the lighting is good and my glasses are not filthy, I don't have any problem reading the map. But people with like really, really bad eyes, worse than mine, might have some problems because there's a lot of relatively fine detail on that map. But it's absolutely stunningly gorgeous too. So, all right. And Marty says he bought that as much for the research as for the game. Christoph de Klerk says, when learning and playing a new game, if you set it aside for some time, you shouldn't have to relearn the rules when you return to it. I mean, I agree with this in principle, but nevertheless, I am scatterbrained enough to have forgotten. Actually, what right here is an excellent example. Okay, I played a reasonable amount of GTS, not a ton. I'm not the world's most experienced GTS player by a long shot, but I've played a reasonable amount of GTS. But we are currently playing Adam Starkweather's related system, CSS from Compass. And nobody at the table dislikes it, but I'm the one at the table with the most hands-on time with GTS, and I'm getting the two things confused all the time. And when we switch back to this, I'm going to get confused again in reverse. I am absolutely positive. So, all right. There's a lot of counters for this particular command. All right. Mark Hodgkinson says Pacific War and a first-hand view of SW Pack is the free online book General Kenny Reports. That might be worth a look. Raids on Wewok, for example, Prettiest Albions. Still talking about the Hood, but also this is a fair point that could have happened at Jutland as well, right? Well, there are games like this, frankly. I can think of a number of games by our old friends at Avalon Hill that were exactly this thing, right? I don't think anybody is going to point out the sterling research that went into a game like Bulge 65, for example, or frankly, even Africa Core. I'm sure that amount wasn't zero, and that's before we even get to games like, Gettysburg 58 was not great, right? I mean, people played it because it was the thing it was the only thing to play at the time that was in this space. But there was really not high quality research went into that, and frankly, I don't think Avalon Hill started doing high quality research until about the late 60s, maybe. So. And Mark says he hasn't seen any design development like SPI. And I mean, I kind of feel like it's worth making the point that SPI had those folks in-house for the most part. I mean, sometimes there'd be an outside developer and or an outside designer and there'd be an inside developer or vice versa. But at the same time, nobody is operating like that nowadays. If the closest thing, maybe there's some kind of analog in the way that Academy Games does things because they have an internal team, but they use a project management model rather than a designer development model. So I got my copy of Last Gamble a couple days before Danny did, actually. So there's that. But Mark is a comedian as well. I don't know if everybody knew that. FGA followed that strategy. Yeah, well, FGA more or less just borrowed SPI's game, pretty much, and then twiddled with the rules until it was broken, and then sent it to the printer. I'm not sure that that's a tremendously inaccurate description of FGA's. This is Fresno Games Association. They did, I don't know, 8, 10, 12 games or something like that total. And then they went away because their reputation for quality was bad. So Alistair Logie, thank you for posting this, because this is in fact kind of exactly where I'm going with this. And there's a couple of ongoing efforts that I think are in danger of this happening, of kind of the design is going to get swallowed up by the research, rather than proceeding hand in hand with the research, right? So Alistair is pointing out a situation, a hypothetical at least situation, where the designer wants to force the game to go in the direction that reflects the research. I mean, if you put it that way, then I don't think there's going to be a problem, right? But the designer's also got to make decisions about what the game is about. And if research turns up stuff that is extraneous to what the game is about, then maybe that research needs to be worked in a more subtle way, rather than necessarily attempting a brute force method of incorporating it, like trying to build statistical models based on TO&Es that will determine your combat factors, for example, or saying that, well, this is a rear echelon Soviet penal unit that was stationed in Archangel for the entire duration of its existence, but we're going to put it in the game so that the Soviet player can rush it into the front line, which the Soviets did not historically do. So it's possible to misdirect the game design and the way the game actually functions in play if you don't use the research that you're doing with some degree of deliberation, right? So not a problem. Welcome aboard. And we're here every Monday night, pretty much. We have taken, I want to say, in the close to 4 years now we've been doing this show. I think I've missed 4 shows, something like that. And check out the show tomorrow, too. I'm not sure who the guest is going to be yet, because I sent out conflicting invites, and it's all my fault this time. So Vince Ree finished flipping Last Gamble last night. I don't want to talk exclusively about Last Gamble, but at the same time, it's incredibly tempting for me to gush over it a little bit. So there's 3 books in the game. There's a rule book, there's a scenario and playbook, and there's a research book that will it's basically a doctoral level dissertation on the Battle of the Bulge by Danny Parker. And for those who don't know, Danny is also the author and or editor of a number of books about the Battle of the Bulge. If Bruno says he did a good job on the game, that's a big endorsement. And if you watched the video today, you will in fact get that very endorsement. That was kind of the preview. I had planned that that video to go live when the Kickstarter went live, but that didn't happen for a variety of reasons. Not least because I have 15 videos in the editing queue right now. So there's that. Sci-fi games. It's a great example. I don't want to say, however, that a sci-fi game does not necessarily require any research, right? It does depend on the game. Now, to what extent you need to research, to what extent you need to know the science, that depends on the game. You don't need to be a professional theoretical physicist to create a good sci-fi game. I don't believe that Jim Crone, for example, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe him to be a professional scientist, and he has designed a dynamite space sci-fi game that I like very much, Space Empires 4X. So, people had this on a table at WBC, the old Avalon Hill Waterloo. And again, it's not like it's the best Waterloo game ever, but it's pretty easy to play, and some people have been playing it for decades. And there's a nostalgia factor there, and it's not like it takes a million years to play either. But it's not like an exceptional amount of research was done to create that game, right? I'm hesitant to say dead, but yeah, it's certainly mostly dead, no doubt about that. There's maybe a surprising amount of activity happening in the Europa space, but it's not happening in the publishing end of the Europa space. It's happening on the fan community end, where people on the Europa Facebook group are like creating new player aids and redoing the maps and the counters and doing all kinds of really cool work to help support this game that they really like. And there's nothing wrong with them really liking it. I have had a positive, more positive than not experience playing Europa. That doesn't mean I am necessarily blind to the flaws of Europa, however. But this topic is not about Europa. It's about the broader problem that we've seen in a few other cases where too much detail is included at the cost of the game itself. There are costs to gameplay that result from that. We're doing on time. We're doing great on time. Chris Yap, thank you so much for stopping by. Enjoys reading designer's notes on the research sources, but it seems that most but not all are English language sources. I will first of all make a mention that there is a 10-page bibliography of sources in Last Gamble, not all of which are in English. This is, of course, quite true, but recognize that for those of us in the United States, that United States wargame publishers are kind of the axis about which the hobby revolves, right? Even for those of us who know that, hey, there's really cool stuff coming out from Europa Simulazioni or Nuts Publishing or Snafu Store or NAC Wargames or whoever, or VUCA, for example. I mean, we did a whole show on that, but even those of us who know that, the great majority of our experiences still lie with English language wargames, okay? And those are almost invariably American, and most of the time Americans don't speak any languages other than English. So I think that's the reason that you're having this problem. Now, on the other hand, it is possible to have the converse opinion as well. The Japanese designer of OCS Luzon, for example, I don't know how well the designer speaks English, but they did use Google Translate to communicate at least at one point with Multiman Publishing. So there's that. But it's absolutely true that there is a tremendous amount of research that could and maybe should be done on non-English language sources for a variety of topics. Now, the easy ones to do, this is one reason why it's easier, all other things being equal, to do an American Civil War game, because all the sources are already in English, right? When you start getting into, or even the Revolutionary War, where, yes, some of the sources will not be American, but they'll still be in English. Footprint, there's there's 3 maps in the box. You'll see this in the unboxing video. There's 3 maps in the box, but one of them is the Battle on the Muse scenario map. So the rest of the game set up completely is 2 maps, normal size more or less. But there are some off-map setup cards and stuff like that. So it's big, but it's not enormous. And yes, this book, I mean, if you remove the counter trays, the full counter trays from the box, you might be able to get a counter tray in that box. I haven't actually tested that yet. Needed that. All right. First thing Eric Goebel thought about the topic was that any game that recreates the Schlieffen plan and how players know what's happening and react to it. He thinks Der Weltkrieg handles that well. I take DW to be Der Weltkrieg. So this is actually a super interesting point as well, because what happens when the historical commanders did something stupid that a smart player, is not likely to replicate, and if they have no motivation to do that, right? I kind of feel like I would like the game to build in incentives to act in the way that the historical commanders did, while retaining enough player flexibility that they can depart from those historical errors. And at the same time, everybody will, not everybody, but plenty of people will complain if they see what they regard as excessive scripting in the game. And this is a criticism that has been levied at Last Chance for Victory. If you read the designer's notes, you can 100% see why Dean did it the way he did it for the first day. Although there's really nothing you could call scripting on subsequent days. But the first day, there's some things that you could read as scripting. But Dean is also giving you, the player, the choice to whether you want to follow the historical script and get Reynolds killed or not. You can choose not to, but then there's a penalty for that. In that Robert E. Lee, because he's got basically zero information to go on and he's getting half-assed reports from Harry Heath, is limited in his command abilities for the first day. Those command restrictions are limited if Reynolds survives. So, but it doesn't like you have to go charge Reynolds into the front line and get him killed. You just pull him off the map and say he's dead. So, all right. Perfidious Albion mentions that GTS and CSS are so similar that it's very easy to mix rules and procedures. They're just different enough to be confusing, to be completely honest about it. Yes, this is true. Time for Trumpets is 5 maps that somewhat miraculously turn into an actual rectangle, but it's a big game. It's a big game and includes probably twice as many counters as Last Gamble does as well. But remember, Last Gamble is functionally a regimental level game where Vok Dam Rhine and Time for Trumpets are battalion level games. So that's why there's a difference in the number of counters. Like I said, I talked for about 3 straight hours at work today. Mark, thanks for stopping by. And take care. Mark says no outside developers during his stay there. They hated working with outside designers. Outside developers wouldn't have made much sense in the SPI model, so that probably never happened, I would think. Except maybe at the very beginning or the very end. I don't know. I don't want to bag on UVA, but exactly what is Academy designing at the moment? I mean, I'm not really sure what they're working on. I saw them at Origins. They were there. UVA was up there talking to people, very energetic as usual. I feel like I sense a tension there because of the Stellaris project, which has obviously not made the timetable that they wanted. Well, I can tell you that probably the most interesting piece from FGA, and I'm not trying to make the statement that it is actually a good game in disguise or an unpolished gem or anything like that. It is a turd. The Eagle and the Sun, which is basically, let's say, a more or less trace of the maps and counters from War in the Pacific. However, they're nicer counters. They have the ships' names on them, which I appreciate. It's a graphical improvement. The map is nicer looking than the War in the Pacific maps are weird because they're printed on blue paper, and you understand why, because it's mostly ocean, but it's still strange, and that does kind of give the land areas a bit of an off look. So for me, the most interesting thing that FGA did was the Eagle in the Sun, and Noble Knight wants about $125 for it, which is, I think, not a particularly outrageous price. I've only ever seen it in the Ziploc, but I think somebody told me that there was a boxed version as well. I know they did some boxed games, but I've never seen Eagle in the Sun in a box personally. Molotov Cocktail says he thinks it's tough for some wargame designers to edit historical elements out of a game for smoother gameplay. So here's the thing, though, is I don't think that just ignoring the historical elements is the approach, right? I mean, surely the approach has to be to consider a given historical element in the context of the game, its scale and topic, and what it is trying to accomplish, and then figuring out how this particular data point informs that. And if the answer is it doesn't, then yeah, you should leave it out. But if the answer is it does, but maybe it slows the game down or something like that, then maybe the right answer is to incorporate it in a more subtle or abstract way. And that's not necessarily ignoring it. Or, there's optional rules too. Oh, yes, indeed it does. Vincenzo mentions the rather legendary Richard Berg's slagging of FGA at some point in Berg's review of games and probably elsewhere too. And to be fair, FGU's, Berg is probably taking an easy route and picking at low-hanging fruit in this case, right? Because let's face it, FGA's games were not great. I would be very surprised if the slightest shred of playtesting was done on many of those games. Now, they did a couple of things that were based on, because remember that Terry Shrum and Mike Crane were the principals at FGA, okay? These are the M and the T in GMT. They were the two of the original founders of GMT, along with Gene Billingsley, and Gene was the one that stayed, and Shrum and Crane took off and formed FGA, which lasted a couple of years and did some pretty slipshod work. So they have at least one game, I'm not sure I remember what it is, that's based on the system used that Gene Billingsley designed for Airbridge to Victory. So it's not like everything that they did was just a ripoff of something else, but they're also the folks who were responsible for the rather legendary Richard Berg landmine, where he couldn't find the name of a particular brigade or something commander, maybe regimental commander, so he put the name of his dentist in there instead, and FGA just copied Berg's order of battle. So Berg caught him red-handed with their hand in a cookie jar. So, errata is another inevitability, man. I'd love to say we now live in a world where errata never happens, but that is a fantasy world, possibly near Narnia somewhere. We are not going to live in that reality anytime soon. Let me put it that way. Now, see, this is a pretty interesting statement by Mark. And this is completely reasonable considering that there is a substantial literature to draw upon as the primary source. You just treat the Burroughs stuff as the primary source and off you go, right? You could totally do that. And I got to tell you, Mark, one of these days, that's going on a table. I am right now, what I need, like this in the process of being sorted is eating half my 4x8 gaming table right now. So that's why the big pressure is to get this thing done so I can do something with it. I think we will actually end up playing it before too long, but I want to get it out of my way for now so I can put something else up. It's not going to be John Carter, though, because I got other stuff in front of it in the queue. Blood Tree Rebellion. Yeah, that's absolutely true. This is in the same sense that a science fiction writer might feel obliged to do some research while writing their science fiction book. This is, I didn't want to get into this, but I guess I will use this as an illustrative example. So I read for the first time pretty recently Robert Heinlein's The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, which I think holds up fairly well in a lot of ways, and less so in some sociological respects. But while reading that book, having done some reading and legwork on my own on the topic of the Russian Revolution, Heinlein did some research to write that book in terms of how revolutions operate internally. There's some real insights in that book. So even something like that might require that some research be done, even though it's a science fiction topic about a rebellion on a friggin' moon base, right? And this right here, Mean Joe Green, is the end of Europa. If there was a unifying event that killed Europa, it was the passing of Winston Hamilton, who at one point, remember, was the director of, or one of the big shots anyway, I'm not sure what the actual title was, at Gamma as well. So this is totally true. There's a balance to be struck here between the research and the game design, right? The mechanical design. And this is where wargamers will get less use, wargame designers, I should say, will get a lot less use out of a book. I forget what the name of the book is, but Jeff Engelstein wrote a book that's basically a giant guide to game mechanics. So he basically put in every single game mechanic he could think of and categorized them and classified them and defined them. A Euro designer might get so much use out of that book, but the mechanical toolkit that wargames have traditionally used is much smaller than that. That's why I didn't pick the book up, because there's like 10 mechanics in there that I might find interesting or useful. That's not to say that one couldn't leverage some of those additional mechanics in a war game, and we have seen examples where that's been done, but it isn't the traditional approach, right? The traditional approach is to use the traditional mechanisms and to be pretty conservative when it comes to growing the territory in which those mechanisms lie. So this is another thing that anybody that got a history degree will know. You do always have to be cognizant of bias, right? The bias of the source you're looking at, the bias of every other source, and the bias of you as the person trying to interpret that source. This is really important, and it is why we sometimes get games that seem like radically off, because the designer went into the process, whether that was the game design or the process of them being a wargamer, and with this kind of settled opinion, and they might have done a bunch of reading, but they didn't ever change their opinion based on the new data that they were obtaining. And that can lead to skewed results, let's say. We've probably seen games where a given side is extremely overpowered, and this, by the way, is not something limited to the U.S. Civil War or to World War II. We've seen this all over the place, including in some hypothetical stuff. So, and this is true. Also, this is why the Samuel Eliot Morrison books leave out a lot of important stuff, because none of that was declassified when those books were written. Jeff Beeler says that the individual Europa games got too big. I'm unclear on what you mean as Wavell's War was originally published as 5 different games of various sizes, because there's like connections to 5 different things in Wavell's War, but that's not really, I wouldn't put it that way. Let me put it that way. The East Africa business did appear earlier using a Europa-derived system in S&T. We've talked about that before too. But it doesn't use the Europa map or counter scale, importantly, which is why it's playable. I would recommend, if anybody's interested in Europa, don't run out and buy Scorched Earth or Fire in the East or Second Front, God forbid, because if you got the stomach for that, awesome. But and I've played Second Front twice now, once for the full campaign and once for just a scenario of June 1, 1944 to the end of 1944, and had a good time with it in both cases. But I mean, it's not going to be to everybody's taste, right? If you're going to investigate not to mention anything about what these things cost. I paid a lot of money for Second Front, but something like Narvik or Case White or First to Fight maybe, or Marina Mercure or Western Desert are good places to look at Europa to see if it's something that you'll be into. But bear in mind that there's a sense in which Jeff is 100% on the money here, where the games aren't necessarily getting bigger in terms of footprint, in terms of map footprint, but they are getting bigger in terms of the increase in the number of counters, because they would do more research and they would find obscure rear echelon units that they would need to make a counter for. So, Char, I'm probably going to mangle your name here, and I apologize, Char. Asks if there's a great war game I could show my 15-year-old cousin. He's really into history and especially historical warfare. A great entry point, I think, is Commands and Colors. There's at least 4 different versions of Commands and Colors available from GMT right now. None of them are egregiously expensive, and they are very solid games, easy to teach. They play relatively quickly. They don't take up 1 million square feet of space. It depends on the topic. The level of complexity in the game, up to a point, is less important than interest in the topic. So I would ask your cousin what specific military history topics they're interested in, and I'd look for something like that. Now, if that answer is World War II, then the Commands and Colors equivalent is a game called Memoir of 44, which I have played and had a fairly negative experience with both times, but there are little plastic miniatures and things like that. There's also things like Axis and Allies or War of the Ring, which are not hugely complicated, but do kind of take all day to play. That's one reason why I like to recommend Commands and Colors. But GMT, off the top of my head right now, has Napoleonics, Medieval, which is pretty much Byzantine stuff, and there's about to be an expansion for that. There's Ancients, which is pretty much Punic War stuff, and there's the Samurai Battles one. So if any of those pushes the correct button, that's what I would shoot for. So, and Joe Faust nails that too. It's I would find out more details about exactly which period of history they're interested in, because I cannot be interested in every single historical topic. I already don't have enough time, and here I am starting asinine third YouTube channels. There we go. So, Italian sources too. Yeah, I'm actually a little, I mean, we can find Americans that speak Italian, right? It's a little harder to find Americans that speak or fluent enough in Chinese reading to like help out with the research, right? Or East Asian stuff in general. And there's a huge gold mine of data to be mined there that will contribute to awesome war games if we can just access that data. As Mark Herman pointed out earlier, there's a lot more on the war in China now than there was in the 80s, but there's still not as much as I would like. I mean, if you go into any Barnes & Noble right now and look at their military history section, you're going to see at least a dozen books on the Battle of the Bulge. You are lucky if they have one book on the war in China. The book on the war in China that I would recommend offhand, there's Barbara Tuchman's Stilwell and the American Experience in China, which is pretty good, but it's also pretty dated. There's another much more recent book called The Forgotten Ally that I think is a pretty good book that talks about that end of the Pacific War. Paths of Glory, if the cousin is extremely into World War I, this might be something to look at. But Paths of Glory is reasonably heavy too, and I love Paths of Glory. I think it's a marvelous game, but I do think it's reasonably heavy, and I don't necessarily think it's a great first war game. I think it's an okay second war game. If World War I is the topic, there is a World War I version of Commands and Colors. There's also a World War I version of Combat Commander, but I don't like Combat Commander. Lots of people do. I'm in a minority on that. That's fine. And the World War I version is called Great War Commander, and it's from Hexasim, which is a French publisher. But you can buy Hexasim's stuff from GMT. I don't know if they have that in particular available at the moment. Some AMREV sources could be in French or Spanish, and in fact, there's a very interesting, Mark Herman will know what I'm talking about. He was sitting down, when I saw him at WBC, he was sitting down with somebody who's working on an American Revolution game from the French perspective, and that sounds super duper interesting to me, because we see 90%, I should say, it's probably closer to 98% of American Revolution games are written or designed by Americans and designed from an American perspective and relying upon American sources for their research, right? The British talked about that they were involved as well, last I checked. So it's a great idea to take a look at British sources. And this is a big reason why I was so interested in Gilbert Collins' game about the American Revolution, because Gilbert is Canadian, and a Canadian is going to look at that topic from a different lens than an American is going to. He's just going to. That alone made that game worthwhile for me. So, Marty Sample mentions the. Well, yeah, and I've used this as an example as well. I'll use this other example to illustrate, and this is the idea that the historical commanders did something that could be regarded as foolish, and that probably a player's not going to do those things. OCS Beyond the Rhine is a game that starts, I think, on the first turn of September in 1944. On something like the third turn of September, that's when Market Garden would happen. So if you're going to do Market Garden in that game, you have to declare it, because you have to plan your airdrops in advance, on the first turn, and then drop them on the third turn. And there is absolutely no incentivizing factor in that game to incite you to do that. Absolutely none. I would have made an incredibly easy adjustment if I were the designer or developer of that game, and that would be to start the campaign on the turn that Market Garden happens. And then this is the situation, deal with it. You can abandon the British 1st Airborne and the 2 American Airborne divisions if you want, but that sounds not an awesome idea. So you're probably going to make sunk cost work to your advantage in this particular case and try and bail those forces out. As opposed to just letting them all get surrounded and surrender. Mark Herman says that hindsight is always a design challenge. Straightjacket procedures are a lot more work to show incentives. He goes with the latter and never the former, except for first turn surprise. I mean, I do think there's a bit of an expectation that insofar as the first turn is kind of part of the setup for there to be some degree of quote-unquote scripting for the first turn. Almost all games do this to some extent. Either the weather is set for the first turn, or the initiative is set for the first turn, or certain things happen in a special way on the first turn. Obvious other example would be many Normandy games that do include some kind of mechanism for the landings and determining how the landings went. So something like Normandy 44, for example. Now, it's also possible to overdo this. Atlantic Wall has a horrendous beach landing management system that I absolutely do not enjoy, and which I think was an absolute misfire, despite me thinking the rest of the game is solid. But that beach landing minigame just blows. On the other hand, you can look at Normandy 44, and I recognize that these games are not at all the same scale, and that's a factor in how it works much better in Normandy 44, where the beach landing minigame takes 2 minutes, right? It's a series of it's a die roll on each beach. I think you might have to make a second die roll, especially for Omaha, on any given beach, and then you might determine some losses and some results, and then that's it, and off you go on the rest of the game. So I don't want to say most, but a lot of the Normandy games I have, because I like the landings and find the landings interesting, so I like to see that in a game. Overlord has it. The expansion for Killing Ground has a special landing mechanism. SPI's Cobra, if you have the expanded version of that, has a special landing mechanism that you'll use on the first turn. So there's tons and tons of examples here. In a Bulge game, you might have a special rule on the first turn that results in most of the Americans being relatively unreactive on that turn, for example. Last Blitzkrieg, for instance, a bunch, not all, but a bunch of the American units start used, so they may get an activation, but they might not. And when we played, a lot of them didn't. So, and that's another thing. If what you are after is describing to the recipient, whoever you're targeting, every little last detail that you feel capable of communicating about the topic, then maybe writing a book is in fact the correct approach, rather than designing a game about it. The game is a war game about a historical topic is a dynamic model of that topic. And that is why, to me, war games are appealing, because I can kind of feel the dynamics out. And that's something that a book might try to convey, but might not succeed in conveying, right? And this is also why I don't particularly mind having half a dozen Gettysburg games, because they are all telling me something a little bit different. Great, 3 Days of Gettysburg plays. I mean, it's the same topic, plays not that dissimilarly in broad strokes from something like Last Chance for Victory, but the mechanical approach is very different between the two games. There are two very similar games about the same topic on very similar scales, then the mechanics are very different. Levy and Camp. Oh, this is a good one. Some people consider these a little heavy. I don't personally. The Levy and Campaign games. They're all the ones that are out right now are medieval, more or less. And the series to look at is the series that starts with the game Nevsky. That's the first game in the series. Don't feel obliged to start with the first game in the series if that's not the interesting topic. But there's at least 4 other ones, at least 3 other ones out now as well. I have 3 Levy and Campaign games. I have Almoravid, Nevsky, and Inferno. I skipped Plantagenet. I probably shouldn't have, because it was received very warmly. Let me put it that way. But it also shipped right around the same time that Inferno did, and I was kind of determined to not buy both of them, to just buy one. And I found the topic of Inferno to be a little more interesting. So, yeah, well, I think Danny was technically outside, right? I mean, I don't know if it actually worked out that way exactly, but he was a kid when he designed the Ardennes quad. So there's that. Lots of people like Memoir 44. I have never played the regular game. I have only played the big epic scenarios, and it's entirely possible that those were just throwing me off. So, as Jeff Anderson points out, the Stellaris offering from Academy is super ambitious. And frankly, I would rather wait for it if that means we get a better product at the end. Now, part of my justification for saying that is I have plenty of other stuff to do already. It's not like I'm going to sit here twiddling my thumbs because Uwe hasn't delivered on Stellaris yet. That is not going to happen. So I will do whatever I have available to me, and then when Uwe's Stellaris comes out, I will be delighted to give it a look, because I am interested in what they have said about it. So this is the last of the Utah Beach counters, by the way. Mark mentions that Redmond Simonson used the blue paper to save a color. This makes a complete sense. And in fact, I don't know how the printing charges were calculated back then, but if those were printed on white paper, boy, they'd use a lot of blue ink, wouldn't they? And that may actually have been a factor right there, not even just saving the color. So Simon Hart, thanks for stopping by. Addressing Mark's point, prefers the latter of incentivization rather than restrictions. I also agree with that, and I think it's the restrictions that make people say the word scripted. More so than the incentives. And I think that's generally true across all game designs, by the way, not just war games. There are things that your mechanics are incentivizing, player actions and activities that players are incentivized to do based on the way that the game is built. And this is true of war games, it is true of Euros, it is true of Ameritrash games, and it's true of RPGs, and it's true of video games as well. You are going to offer a reward of some kind for doing the thing that the designer has decided to incentivize. And hopefully that is informed by the research, right? Ooh, that's a good call, too. John Nolan mentions the Columbia Block games. These are excellent games, not really solitairable, but that may or may not be a consideration for you. But they are, with the possible exception of East Front, West Front, Euro Front, they're all quite easy. Napoleon is a very nice operational game about the Waterloo campaign. Bobby Lee is a very nice operational game about exactly what does Bobby Lee cover. I don't remember. It's been a bit since I looked at it, actually, and I've never played it. Eventually, that's one of the videos in the queue. It's something I haven't gotten a chance to talk to. I'll tell you what. I think we underplay Redmond Simonson's contributions to wargaming and the state of the wargaming art when we say we love his graphic design work, because what some people will interpret that as is it's the way it looks. And while that's part of it, there's a lot of design innovations. I don't think we would have had turn record tracks if it wasn't for Redmond Simonson. Berg's therapist, not dentist. I've always heard the story as dentist, but in any case, it was not a real dude. And FGA hand in the cookie jar. So, Ivor Airman, thanks for stopping by from sunny southwest Ohio, I should say. Compass Games never has errata because Bill said so. Bill, make sure you say that on the Compass Games live show. Just make sure that Bill said there would never be any errata ever again. And I am sure that he would not possibly be incorrect about such an important statement. Let's put it exactly that way. It'll go over like gangbusters. So, we love Bill, but we would mention errata, and you might get the Bill volcano. Let's put it that way. Well, so I agree with this. I agree with this characterization. Some of my ASL buddies say they're not as bad as they look, but I think the fundamental problem is they actually handed the module to a Finnish design team, and it's maybe not all that unexpected that Finns would come off rather well and slightly Superman-like, given that that's how it worked out. Vincenzo mentions Gondor from Mr. Berg, and was that a Berg Solitaire? Because the games of Middle-earth included War of the Ring, which is the centerpiece and by far the largest game, and then Sauron and Gondor. And Gondor is the Siege of Minas Tirith, and as I recall, the main game was designed by Berg and Howie Barish, and with I think Howie Barish taking the lead. I think. It feels like that anyway. So there you go. But one of the smaller games had a co-designer that may have been Linda Mosca. I'm not sure about that. And I'm not sure which one it was. Because I actually had the trilogy at one point, and I stupidly got rid of it. People got to get rid of games sometimes. It happens, but it's my personal goal to never get rid of anything again unless it's on my terms, which means my wife will yell at me if I sell games because she knows what happens is I'll probably end up rebuying them. So William Aaron says that doesn't it follow that a wargame must allow for scenarios that lead to a different outcome than occurred historically? I would agree with this statement. And again, I think this is a balance that the designer and or developer and or team needs to bear in mind, right? If it's just going to play out exactly like it did historically, then I don't know why anybody would want to play that game. You might as well watch the movie. And as Mark has said in the past, soon as you start moving pieces, it's an alternate history game, right? So the question, I think, is, are the results that you get out of the game, the output, if you will, of the algorithm that is the game's mechanics, is that output parsimonious with your understanding of history? Is it believable? Is it, I don't want to use the word realistic because we've talked about that before, and I think too many people will misunderstand the use of that word. But does it give you historically reasonable outcomes? And as long as that's the case, then yeah, a good game is going to allow for games that differ from history. If it doesn't, then I'm not sure why you've chosen to present that set of research that you did as a game rather than as a podcast or a book or whatever, right? Realism versus playability is a somewhat related concept, but that's not the angle I'm approaching it from here tonight. I'm here trying to say that the research is really important, but it isn't necessarily more important than the design work, the actual set of mechanics that you're using. This is a good point, too, when I was talking about bias earlier. Everybody's biased. Expect everybody to be biased. It's not reasonable to expect anybody to be unbiased. Your customers, if you're designing a game for other people, are going to be biased as well. That's absolutely true. Does the designer focus more on historical accuracy or historical consistency? After all, too much accuracy makes an inflexible game. I'm not sure that I agree with the framing here. Let me put it that way. I see what Perry's getting at, but I'm not sure I agree with the framing because I don't think the real tension is between accuracy or consistency. You want consistency is a better word for what I would want to go for because it's contributing to that sense of believability in the results of the output, right? But different designers are also going to design games from different perspectives and have different design goals, and that's completely acceptable as well. So we are time-wise, we're good time-wise, but I am going to try to catch up on the chat, at which I am perilously behind, while we hear from our good friends at Noble Knight Games, the official sponsors of the Counterclipping Show. Take it away, Noble Knight.
Here at Noble Knight Games, we've been carefully growing the world's largest selection of board games, role-playing games and dice, war games, miniatures and paints, card games, and more, going on 25 years now. Our rustic castle contains more game and hobby goodness than you can shake a stick at, complete with careful packaging and the finest customer service the land can provide. You can buy, sell, trade from anywhere in the world, just like nature intended. Noble Knight Games.
All right, thank you, Noble Knight, the official sponsor of the Counterclipping Show, and don't forget about the affiliate link that's in the video description. Mitchell Meyer, welcome to the show. Mentions War of Resistance, which is the Europa family. It's not formally a Europa game because the World War I games and the Pacific games were not World War I. The World War I line was called the Great War, and the Pacific game was called Glory. There were two games in the Glory Pacific sequence. War of Resistance, which was the first year or year and a half, maybe, of the Second Sino-Japanese War, except it's not really, I think it's like 39 to 41, something like that, which skips a whole lot and ignores the fact that the war started in 1937 right there and had other stuff happening prior to that. And the other one is... Oh, crap. It's the Philippines one. I forget what it's called. Mark Herman says Tower of Skulls. This is on my list of things to read, but I have not either obtained it or read it yet. Oddly enough, the Philippines War is the Philippines is the one I have, but it's also like 41 and early 42, rather than the reconquest of the Philippines in 44 and 45. So, oh, this is a good point, too. Another good entry point is the Civil War Brigade Battles series from Worthington Games. There are several games in that series at this point. However, their Chancellorsville game is not part of this series, and I have not played it. I have heard good things about it, but I haven't played it or really looked at it particularly seriously. So the ones you want to look at are... I'll be honest, I had issues with Antietam, but I thought Shiloh was pretty good, and the more recent ones are, there's a 7 Days Battles volume, which sounds like it's packed with content, there's a Gettysburg volume, and there's a Franklin, which may include Spring Hill, I'm not sure, volume. That's actually the latest in the series is Franklin. Those are super duper easy to play, and if your cousin is interested in any of those topics, then yeah, I would actually absolutely look at that. All right. I did not get caught up very much, by the way. Mo from Mo's Game Table is here. Mo, thanks for stopping by. Fortress Europa. Are we talking about the Avalon Hill Fortress Europa published by Compass? Because there might be two games with that name, maybe. Might be that the other one is Festung Europa. Fortress Europa, I'm thinking about the Avalon Hill game. Yeah, I mean, it's not terribly complicated, but at that level, it's going to feel kind of primitive just because of the quality of the components. But there is a more recent version from Compass. But I might recommend Russian Campaign instead. It's very easy, and for a new player, I would actually recommend the version of Russian Campaign that comes from Compass rather than the one from GMT. If you're an experienced wargamer, much less experienced Russian Campaign player, I would strongly recommend the GMT 5th edition, but the Compass one is easier to digest because it sticks pretty closely to the original 1972 or whatever it was Jedco game. So... Joe Perez says, time for commercial, and then occurred to me 10 minutes afterwards. This is how far behind I am on the chat, folks. Do you want to make a game or a simulation? I don't think there's a direct tension between these two things, but there can sometimes be some level of, there's a decision that has to be made, right? As to whether you're going to err more on the side of detail or more on the side of cleanliness and simplicity, right? I am trying to get away from using the game and so the problem with the description that Mo's using here, and I've used this too, I'm just recognizing that the terminology is a little bit problematic, is that the implication, even if nobody believes this, is that, okay, it's a game or a simulation. Well, that implies this binary choice where it's either one or the other. And the fact is most games are going to fall somewhere in the middle. There's going to be very few war games anyway that are pure games with no simulation value at all. An example might be Kriegspiel, Avalon Hill's Kriegspiel, which is not regarded super duper highly. Or Tactics, frankly. I'm not sure that really has any useful insights in it. On the other hand, one might easily say that something like Gauss is almost the exact opposite and is a heavy simulation. So I think I'm going to end up using this terminology myself, but I want to be cautious and saying that this is a spectrum and not an on or off switch where it's a binary choice if it's one or the other, right? Different designers are going to fall at different points on that spectrum, and different games from even the same designer are going to fall in different places on that spectrum. And we've got Mark Herman here tonight to serve as our example. On the one hand, we have the Rebel Fury, which is extremely tight, extremely streamlined. It plays very quickly. And on the other hand, we have the massively detailed Pacific War that goes into basically every single aspect of its topic at the operational level, right? So that's, even individual designers are going to move back and forth on that spectrum depending on exactly what they are trying to do with any particular game design. Everybody agrees that the classic Ardennes quad is in fact a classic. It is one of the quads that most frequently get called the best of the quads. It's probably closer to, I've even seen people favor it over Napoleon's Last Battles, to be completely honest. So, and I think there's justification for that. That's another thing. One of the things I want to do, because I got so much time, is I got tons of SPI stuff at this point. Some of this stuff I've played, but not all of it. I want to get some of this stuff on a table, right? So, yes, Mean Joe Green. Academy Games is making a board game based on the Stellaris computer game. It is late. I'm not sure how late because I didn't back it. This was one of those things that I said, this looks interesting, but I'm not going to throw Kickstarter any money here. I'll wait and see when it comes out and see what the buzz about it is. And that is still exactly where I am with this. So I will be happy to give it a look. I have spent plenty of time in the computer game. Not as many hours as a lot of people have, but I've probably put 100 or 120 hours over the years into Stellaris, the computer game, and I enjoy it, even if I am not very good at it. So I am happy to look at whatever Academy Games does on this, but until then, I am not going to sweat it out because the game is not out yet. I now have to go through the stack of counters I just put down. Actually, maybe I don't. Just see if I got all the colors right. Yeah, we're good. So, not quite sure I'm going to finish all of these tonight, but I should do all but one formation. On Rails, this is a turnoff for, I think for just about everybody, to be completely honest. If a game feels like you lack... This is what I will describe as player agency, okay? I want to make interesting decisions as the player. I want to be conflicted. I want to say, ooh, I got a couple different options here, and some of them are more attractive than others, but the attractive ones have these downsides, and I want to have to do that calculus. That, to me, is an interesting decision space. If the game is restricting that in anything that feels like an arbitrary way, that is a significant turnoff. That said, to some extent, I'm willing to deal with it if I feel like it is at a palatable level, like, for example, in Last Chance for Victory. So, I would not. Clummy games are great for solitaire. Maybe if you, are have split personality syndrome, I suppose. That would be fine. I'm talking about the ones with the hidden information. The War on the Any, yeah, but I'm not sure what period it covers. I mean, I think it starts in 1862 and runs to 1863 or 4, something like that. I'm just not sure what the boundaries on the topic are in the case of Bobby Lee specifically. So, so there's actually rationale behind this. American morale is not as high as you might suspect it would be, but remember that the morales can at least be different on the broken side of the counter. So Americans will break relatively easy, but they will also recover relatively easily. Because most, like the Germans, I think the morale tends to go down on the backside. The Americans, it doesn't. So Captain Nolan says that well, they're all 2-player games except for the big one, War of the Ring itself, which is a 2-player game that has a 3-player variant. The self-rally thing with the Finns in ASL is one of the things that makes them feel a little overpowered. I'm not sure they all have self-rally capabilities, though. Remember that Hakapala, the Finnish module, includes a whole bunch of new Finn unit types that weren't in the original ASL rules, so I'm not positive that all of those can self-rally, but I'm not sure they can't. Ryan Heward, thanks for stopping by. Yes, this sounds like great fun to me. Shooting severed heads with your catapult. There you go. Gondor, Richard Berg, Linda Mosca. Linda Mosca might be the first published female wargame designer. I'm not positive, but it seems likely. She did one of the games in, I forget whether it's the Crimean War Quad or the 30 Years War Quad or one of the other quads. She did one of the games in those as well. And the Tabletop's Edge. Doug, thanks for stopping by. Sorry for not getting back to you on your last email, by the way. My email life is just a horrendous disaster right now. Particularly when I send out the wrong information to people. So Eric Hansen, we've actually been on the topic for basically the whole time with some amount of digressions. So this is actually a point that Mark is using here, a piece of terminology that is often used by science fiction writers, suspension of disbelief. I'm not sure this gets talked about a lot in science fiction circles anymore because science fiction is such a mainstream popular thing that nobody thinks twice about it. And maybe they should, right? And that's one reason why I am willing to forgive some of Europa's problems to some extent, is that at the end you get out of it what feels like a reasonable result, right? And even along the way, if you take 2 steps back from the board and look at it at the macro level, you're getting what look like reasonable results. So Doug's talk. I think we're talking now about the Glory series, War of Resistance. Doug says it's 1937, which is good actually. Although I would have preferred had it had the entire conflict in it. There are a variety of reasons why I feel like Europa is a bad platform for this particular topic. And Stacking Limit points out that the Philippines game is The Damned Die Hard. I should know that because I have that one. Did I say something besides Rebel Fury? Yeah, I think it's just too I think this is just a little too binary. I don't think it maybe is useful sometimes, but I'm not convinced that this language is useful all the time. So, and there are games with, literal force multipliers built in, like the Second World War series from Diffraction Entertainment or the Knowledge Company or whoever they are now. That's another example where to me, there are specific mechanics in that just felt like too much, not necessarily the entire game in aggregate. I feel like it's complicated in aggregate, but I probably could have handled it if it weren't for that multiplier mechanic that you used on the factors. I think that's a pain in the nuts. So Steve Dolges, Steve, thanks for stopping by. And points out, I think everybody can agree with this on a basic level, is the decision space should be reasonably broad, but you need plausible decisions too. You can't decide, I am playing the Americans in the Battle of the Bulge. I will bombard the German positions with rockets. Well, no, you're not going to do that. So, because you didn't have those. Vince Ree mentions, and we see this a fair amount too, especially in East Front games, you might have the Hitler directives that say the German player has to do this or that, or not retreat, or a variety of other things. Or, like, say, Antietam games that, or a variety of other Civil War battles, frankly, that have to somehow mechanically enforce McClellan's timidity. It's always better if that's built into the game rather than just being its own separate line that says, and McClellan is a useless imbecile for the first 7 hours of the game. In None But Heroes, the line of battle game on Antietam, that's built into the orders rules. You actually have to, in order to successfully issue orders, you have to make a roll to do that. And then there's a certain amount of time has to go by before those orders can then be acted upon by the unit that's being given the orders. And McClellan has a hard time issuing the orders that he needs to issue. He will eventually get an order in that'll unleash Sumner or Burnside or whoever it is, based on the situation on the board at the time. So, might have been Mod Quad, actually, one of the Mod Quads. There might have been another one too, and I might be getting her mixed up with Virginia Mulholland as well. That's possible. So, let's see here. I'm trying to get... I think there needs to be better terminology around this term abstraction too, because I'm not entirely sure what it is intended to mean in all cases. I use it too, and it's another one of these terms that we throw around a lot, that this or that game handles this or that topic in a very abstract way. And I think that gives a sense of what might be going on there, but it doesn't really tell us much about, well, what does that actually mean, right? In the case of something like an OCS, what is abstracted is, here's an example of an abstract rule in OCS that probably many people will say is not an abstract rule, but it totally is. Surprise. Surprise is totally an abstract rule. Now remember, there's other factors that dial into surprise as well, action rating specifically. But when you put all those factors together, what you end up with is a way of simulating tactical surprise or tactical ambushes or whatever at the operational level. You're abstracting that out, right? And it works. It's, I've said this before, it's a mechanic that feels like it won't work, and it totally does work. So, and this, I think, is part of the reason why the Finnish Trilogy folks decided that they wanted to do separate games between the Winter War and the Continuation War and the Lapland War. By the way, the Miku Games, the publishers of the Finnish Trilogy, did a game on Torino or something like that, and they still have a few copies of that in stock, and they're selling them reasonably cheaply. I don't have any of the contact information for that, unfortunately, but it is floating around. I do think there are also people who rebel against this perceived phenomenon, and this definitely happened. But I don't agree with some of the talk around it nowadays, where games got super duper complicated in the late 70s. Well, okay, but there were still simple games, right? It's not like all the games suddenly turned into these giant complicated monsters. There were always plenty of simple games, and in fact, those simple games tended to remain in print and remain popular. All of the SPI quads, for example, games like Gettysburg, the earlier versions of Gettysburg anyway. Games like Bulge 65, it's a tremendously accessible game, right? It's a super easy game to play, and it was in print for a long time, until sometime in the 80s they redid it again. And that was the one that, Bulge 81 is the one I'm talking about. That's the one that Bruno helped out with. So, also, not everybody has the ability to play a monster game, and it, monster game players like myself sometimes do tend to forget that. That's kind of a side thing from what we're talking about tonight. But there is something of a relationship between size and complexity too, right? My expectation is if I'm gonna buy a game, here's two games that I'll use as an example. I'm going to buy a Normandy game, and I've got two to pick from. I've got Normandy 44 by Mark Simon, which is a marvelous game. It's at the regimental level. You can play it in a day. It takes anywhere between, depending on whether you're playing the shorter scenario or the full campaign, it could take a weekend, but you can also play it in 5 or 6 hours, no problem, if you play the shorter scenario, maybe even less than that. And, it's a medium complexity game. It's not terribly heavy. It is appropriate level of complexity for the level of detail that the scale of the game is giving me. On the other hand, if you took those exact same rules and plugged them into Atlantic Wall, I think it would be a disaster, because that's got a completely different map scale. It's got a completely different... I mean, you could make adjustments strictly for the scale by adjusting the TEC and the movement factors and stuff. But you're going to get more detail in that game system because there's more detail on the map. The topic is being treated with more detail. What a lot of designers, I don't want to say a lot, but some designers at least, will kind of ignore that and say, I'm going to handle, and the prototypical example of this would be the Grognard Simulations people. And don't get me wrong, I have quite a bit of respect for what those fellas are doing over there. However, they have basically decided, I'm going to take this rather detailed tactical system and I'm going to do all of Kursk or all of Normandy with it. And that turns into something really, really big, really, really slow playing, to the extent that I'm not sure anybody's playing the whole thing. There's definitely not finishing it at Consim Expo from what I hear. So, all right, I'm spinning to the bottom here. All right. So, yeah, see, the problem here, Mo, is I think, you're right, but you can give a lot of examples, but the examples don't necessarily get to the core of what we mean when we say that a given mechanic is abstract or not. And that's why I think that there's nothing really wrong with the term, but I think it is not rigorously defined enough to be as useful as it might otherwise be. Let me put it that way. Vincenzo says, the more things that are downstream from your command level, the more they should be abstracted. If you're a tank commander, it's important to know that a crewmate is wounded, if not if you lead the company. Yeah, that's absolutely true. And yet, well, I don't know about to the level of individual tank crews, but if you were to say, well, let's take this as an example. It's a company scale game, right? The units are companies, but the individual commands are basically usually divisions or roughly equivalently sized units. And you want to float around that like core level, I think anyway. You want to say this is a company level game. So yeah, we're going to include some things that are maybe sub-company points of detail, like things like whether the unit is in column or deployed, for example. In CSS, you might have counters for individual support weapons that can be allocated or unallocated to individual units. But you also have this sort of higher level of detail that in this game system is represented by the command point and dispatch point economies and the way that the basic turn structure actually works. So, Brent McCabe, thanks for stopping by. And this is definitely one way to approach it. There's kind of two kind of competing modus operandi, modi operandi, I don't know, for monster games. On the one hand, you've got folks that are going to say things like, Well, it's a big game, so we want to keep it as simple as we can. And that may not turn into tiddlywinks at the end of the day, right? It might still be in comparison to other games, might be reasonably complicated, but it's not necessarily going to be Death Ride Kursk either, which if you play it with the logistics extension, that looks pretty complicated. And I haven't played it, so if I'm full of shit, somebody say so. But that looks pretty complicated to me when you understand the sheer volume of stuff that you are dealing with in terms of map real estate and counters, and then on top of that, you've got a fairly detailed system of rules as well. All right, I think we are going to be done with the clipping for this evening, but I have gotten tremendous progress done, and I probably won't have time to finish this tomorrow. To be honest, I just hope I'm not still. I don't have to bust this out again next Monday. So, I'm pretty excited about this, too. I better be. It was expensive. I'm not going to say this is a cheap game, because it was not. But, at the same time, I like this system. It's fun to play. And, of course, Alistair says you can't get specific about abstraction. Mark mentions the original La Bataille rules from 74, if I'm not mistaken, from La Bataille de la Moscova. That's still a game that I think has things going for it. But definitely that has been... I mean, it's a little complicated because there's like multiple competing sets of rules, but it's definitely gotten more complicated in the years since. No doubt about that. Oh, there we go. We're doing pretty good on this, I think. As far as how much we got done tonight, I got no real reason to complain. Naturally, I've got rubbish in the tray, but what are you going to do? All right. Meandering Mike's counter clipping project this week was Kriegspiel. Well, that depends. If it's Kriegspiel, then that could take some effort. But if it's Avalon Hill Kriegspiel, then really the only effort required is the effort of walking it over to the wastebasket. So, I have this, but I haven't played it. So, I didn't bring it down. I wish I would have. The Carl Fung, thanks for stopping by. Yeah, it was pre-order. I think was $250 or $225 or something like that. It's expensive. I mean, it's not like you're not getting a lot of game in it. I'm not complaining about that, but it is expensive. You can't realistically say it isn't expensive. So I guess we'll put that here. And we've got miscellaneous Allied counters, miscellaneous German counters, and none of it fits in this friggin' tray. I'm just throwing this stuff in a GMT tray for now for later bagging. I have elected to go with baggies for like I have with the other games in the series. I've elected to go with baggies for this game. I will probably end up regretting that decision, and it might end up getting revisited because I may end up doing 3D printed trays for this thing, but then I'm going to want to, if I do it, I'm going to want to do 3D printed trays for the rest of the series as well, and the 3D printer is still not working 100% of the time. So, Red Strike has rather a lot of scenarios in it, as I recall, too, so you're not necessarily committing yourself to one huge game. And you know what? I would, oh God, easily. Kriegspiel is kind of a... I don't want to say it's the worst thing Avalon Hill ever did, but it's because there's some stuff on there that's just like beyond the pale. But some of the non-war games, that is, and I'm specifically thinking of the Witchcraft kit and the Drinker's Wild and Smoker's Wild and that kind of stuff. I don't know who bought those. So I hardly drunk any whiskey, which is problematic. So, Christoph, I have had many people express this to me over the years, and the fact is that if I weren't clipping right now, I'm not clipping right now. I'm done clipping for the night. But I can run a show and clip at the same time. And before I was doing that, I would like watch TV and clip at the same time. So I'm not subtracting from my gaming time by clipping. I'm making my gaming time feel nicer and more luxurious by spending other time and multitasking in clip encounters. And I think as folks will recognize, I don't need to pay a ton of attention to the clipping process at this point, even though I am using the slightly more difficult to use clipper. I did miss clip one. About a month ago, I misclipped a corner where it was a bad Nike swish misclip. Meandering Mike mentions that BGG has the same rating as Outdoor Survival, and Outdoor Survival sold 1 million times more copies, and it did, but that's because D&D specifically said go buy Outdoor Survival so we don't have to create wilderness rules. So, and it is like 45 counters. Are they even square counters? I thought they might be. Are they round counters? I'm not sure. I might be thinking of Luftwaffe or something like that. I don't always sleeve cards. If it's a game that I feel like I'm going to play a lot, I will sleeve the cards. If it isn't, I won't bother. Or sometimes the cards are not cards that need to be sleeved because you're never going to shuffle them, like Axis Empires, for example. The only ones I sleeved in those were the Fortunes of War cards, because those are a little smaller deck that you shuffle and hand out. The rest of the cards will never get shuffled. You're just referring to the cards. They're really just a play aid at that point. So you'll have to inquire with Stigler about this. I believe he is in the strange country called Georgia right now, and by Georgia I mean the place with Atlanta in it, playing GBACW this week. So that's probably why Mr. Stigler, I'm not sure I've seen him tonight. Let me put it that way. I'm not positive I agree with this, by the way, but you can actually get a machine to shuffle your cards for you. They will wear your cards fairly badly. I like the rounded. I mean, I've been clipping corners since the early 90s. I had never seen clipped corners before. I was introduced to it as a concept in the early 90s by the folks I was doing RPG stuff with, who were also ASL people. And I'm like, wow, what's with the corners on these things? Oh yeah, I clip. It makes them easier to handle. And they're damn it if they're right. Now, those guys use the old toenail clip or stop sign methodology back in the day. We don't have to do that. Now we have specialized tools explicitly for clipping. Well, maybe they're not explicitly for clip encounters, but they clip corners in a very controlled and consistent way, which it's kind of hard to do with nail clippers. And I used nail clippers for 20 years, right? So, Firefly 10th Anniversary Edition. Is this the one from, who does this? Fantasy Flight or somebody like that? I've played this and I didn't really like it that much. Mark Hodgkinson mentions World War II PTO design and complexity with respect to scale of individual ships. And I take this to mean regiments, brigades, and divisions, and air points. He likes Pacific. There's a lot of acronyms in here, Mark. Pacific War over Advanced PTO. I haven't played Advanced PTO. I'm actually very likely to actually play Advanced ETO and PTO pretty soon. Well, by pretty soon, I mean sometime in the next 18 months or so. But one of the locals has acquired copies, and he's intrigued by it, and I'm willing to give it a shot. I'd be more interested in playing the TSR versions, to be honest about it, but that's just me. Yes, we found this out back in the day with the Magic cards, because we got tired of constantly shuffling the Magic cards. So, Firefly is Gale Force 9. Thank you, Carl. Like I said, I played it once, but they can be. The more snug the sleeves are, the better. If you get the baggy sleeves, they're a little harder to handle, in my opinion. I mean, I sleeved all of Europa Universalis, The Price of Power, and that thing's got, I don't even know how many cards in it. It's at least 500 or 800 cards. I don't know. It's a crazy amount of cards. There's an expansion for that coming, too. So, I have too many games to do this with, and I have too many games that don't all fit in the box if I do this. Now, I really put a lot of effort into making games fit into their boxes, but sometimes it just doesn't work. ASL is the obvious example, but if it was the only example I had that was like that, I would be much less upset. As it is, games that are stored outside the boxes include all the Gauss games, World at War. Actually, no, I baggied World at War, and that's all in the World at War box. The War and the War Pacific from Compass, those are baggied, those are in the boxes. But games I keep outside of the boxes, ASL, World in Flames, all the Gauss games, and the Commands and Colors games, because the blocks are very bulky. Especially if you have, like, all of them. If you just have, like, a core set, you could just throw them in a baggie and throw them in the box. You're fine. See, the thing is, though, that if even if you buy like a monster, what is the most monster block game? I suspect that the answer is Eurofront from Colombia, where you put East Front with West Front, add the Mediterranean, and then you have Eurofront. That's probably the biggest block game anybody's done. Maybe the only exceptions I could think of might be the ones from who was it that did the other block games? Blocks in the East, Blocks in the West. I'm trying to remember the name of the publisher. Somebody will throw it in the chat. But I like, well, Vassal eliminates the need for a lot of these handling problems. Let me put it that way. So I made a compression device, a 3D print. It didn't work very well. I made a compression device to kind of compact the sleeved cards so they would lay flat, or it didn't really work. If the sleeve cards stick together, who cares? You just replace the sleeves. I've never really had this happen, though. Blocks in the East, Blocks in the West, and Med. If you put them together, maybe, yeah. This was, and yeah, it's big. I don't even I mean, I guess I do kind of have, I kind of don't. So the current edition of World in Flames has 3 versions. I'm not sure they're all available right now. There's the classic, which is kind of just the core game, but even the core game is pretty big. And then there's the deluxe, which has a bunch of extras, like 4 expansions added to it. And then there's the super deluxe, which has all the deluxe stuff plus an additional 3 games on top of that, plus some extra doodads. So I really do. Vento Nuovo. Thank you, Mike Reed. Somebody else might have thrown this in. But that is the publisher I was thinking of. It did Blocks in the East and Blocks in the West. And I am really sweet on the Cube for Me trays nowadays. I got to be honest. I was going to put this in Cube for Me trays, and I just didn't think it worked out. I'll end up with box bulge, and the way these are going to sit on the shelf, I'm not comfortable with that. So I'm just going to go with baggies instead. It'll be fine. Man, I don't know. I'll tell you what. I'm not positive there's enough room for 1 counter tray in Last Gamble, and it has like 5 counter sheets, 5 or 6 counter sheets. So I'm not entirely sure how I'm going to manage to store that either. I loathe storing games outside their boxes, but at the same time, you know, we recognize that it's going to happen. I'm going to open this door because it's like 175 degrees in here. And the cat might come in, but we're almost done, so it's okay. Mark Hodgkinson says you can easily put the errata and any new issued counters in place. I'm not sure where we're going with this. Maybe I missed a comment. That's very plausible. So, yeah, pretty impressed with the Last Gamble. So let's all pray that we get the editing done this week. It's going to be about 2 hours. It's going to take so long to edit. So, winner's victory. Oh, so Cube for Me trays do not necessarily fit in every box. I have found that they don't quite fit right in the Decision Games flat boxes either. So, not yet. It usually will take them a little bit to figure out that I've opened the door. Usually. So, this is possible. But if the humidity's high enough to affect this, I'd be concerned for other reasons as well. Joe Perez says he got the Utah counters in 3 Aegis trays for the combat units and half a dozen sandwich bags. I'm not a big... I've done it too, where I've done a hybrid solution where some of the stuff's in trays and some of it's in baggies. I don't like that, but, you know, sometimes you do what you got to do to keep everything organized. But I did find that the... What game did I test this on? I don't even remember. In one of the Decision Games flats, I tried to see if the Cube for Me trays would fit. And I mean, obviously they'll fit. These are the big flat 2-inch boxes. They'll fit, but you can't fit them you can't fit like one stack of trays on one side and another stack of trays on the other side. The Cube for Me trays are a little too big for that. You have to turn them in a landscape way to get them in the box. And that makes them less useful for what I tried to do. That said, using the counter tray bin dividers, I managed to get all of Axis Empires into, 4 or 5 trays or something like that. So the tray dividers really do help a lot, in my opinion. Honestly, less so with games with huge counters like these 5/8 inch counters. So... There are some games where the natural storage system is baggies, right? Napoleonic Wars is like that. I mean, don't. There's no reason to overthink that. You're playing the French. Here's the blue pieces in a big baggie with maybe some blue dice. You are fine. So I don't know. We're more or less on topic. We haven't even talked about booze or food, or we haven't even made fun of Dan this week. So as far as I'm concerned, this is a pretty on point show. On that subject, let's talk about what's coming up this week. So I got the preview out today. There is another video coming tomorrow or Wednesday. Well, we have the Chit Show tomorrow with Dan, and you might. The guest will be good. Let me put it that way. Even if it's just Dan and me, it'll be great. But Wednesday, we have an interview with Open-Ended Games, the publishers of Against the Dark Master, a fantasy tabletop role-playing game. If you're interested in that, watch the video. If you're not, don't. It's okay. Best of luck. I've mentioned this a couple of times. It's not gonna be easy, and this is probably gonna be a baggy solution for me too, to be completely honest about it. It just might be that. So the video tomorrow is Tuesday's show. And there's shorts. I've got, I think, 3 shorts scheduled for this week. It's not as much. There's been a noticeable downtick in attention on the shorts. Let me put it that way. Well, you know what? I've got an entire series of videos on this very topic. So there's that. We also have the unboxing of I, Napoleon, which was supposed to have been last week, but then other stuff stepped in front of it. So that is currently scheduled for next Thursday. This Thursday ought to be the designer-assisted unboxing with The Last Gamble. Again, dependent on whether I get the editing done, but I'm going to probably just sit down with a glass of scotch after tomorrow's show and work on the editing for that. In addition to that, we have a show on Thursday evening, which is a live show on Thursday evening, where we're going to talk to Bruce Harper, the designer of and general honcho of A World at War from GMT. And that is a topical interest of World War II Strategic is a topical interest of mine as well. It does make sense to store, I mean, if you're going to hybridize, it does make a lot of sense to put the units in a tray so you can find the individual pieces that you need. And then, like, if you've got, like, a lot of the same kind of baggy markers, just throw them all in a baggie. That makes complete sense. Oh, I'm sure this will, make sure, again, Alistair, make sure this gets suggested on the Compass Games live show whenever the next one is. I'm sure Bill will be delighted to hear this valuable and positive feedback. So, I suppose this is true. This mostly does not work for me. I, Napoleon is actually one of the rare exceptions where I'm going to keep the insert. I think the insert is fine. The game has a board, but it's mostly cards, and there's, 30 counters or something like that? Huge counters. Huge, beautiful counters for that matter. But those will go in a baggie, and everything else will just go right in that slot in the box that is made by the spacer right. So I mean, I appreciate the humor in this, but this is slightly exaggerated. Every few years there will be a substantial change, and all the other changes are more or less little noodly things that came out in tournament play, and they're just corner cases that aren't going to come up very often, unless you're like a lifestyle World at War player, and there are some where you play it constantly, and hell, I'd like to play it again for that matter. So remember that the box inserts are not really there for you. The box inserts are there so that the components don't bang around and get damaged in transit, more than they are for the aesthetic sense of the buyer, right? Which is one reason why I don't have any hesitation to just remove them to the recycling bin. I have been known, if I feel like the insert has cool art on it or something, I've been known to cut the flaps off and glue it into the bottom of the box so I retain the pretty art. But I don't always do that. Sometimes it just goes right in the trash. So, I find Steve's criticisms of A World at War, and I say this as somebody that likes A World at War, I find Steve's criticisms of A World at War to be completely reasonable. To be honest, it is probably more complicated than it is, and its presentation isn't doing it any favors either. It is presented in a way that makes it difficult to approach. So this is actually where a lot of the rules flux have happened, is actually in the oil rules. That's absolutely true. So, I am not... I think I've touched... Maybe I'll close with this. How much time do I got? Well, not much time. We're technically out of time, but I'll close with this. I've never felt... If I'm interested in a topic, then I have never felt that it's a problem for me to have multiple games on that topic. I like Ardennes 44. I want to play Battles for the Ardennes, and I had a fabulous time with Last Blitzkrieg. And frankly, I think I'll play Last Blitzkrieg again. But different games and different designers are going to tell you different things about the battle, right? Or different things about the context in which the battle takes place, which I think is where Last Blitzkrieg really worked well for me. So I don't have a problem with that. That's why I have like 4 games on Cedar Mountain, right? Because I want to see what the different games have to say. I don't... I mean, now, it's also true to say that any given individual may have just had enough exposure to a particular topic. But that probably what the real reason there is not that they don't want another game on that topic. The problem is that they're tired of that topic and they want to do something new. That's completely reasonable. So for somebody that's already played a million Bulge games, maybe they don't need to play any more Bulge games. Maybe they have the Bulge game that they like. For plenty of people out there, they're never going to move on from Bitter Woods. Bitter Woods is supposed to be great. Everybody agrees that it's great. I'm sure it's great. I haven't played it. It's supposed to be good. But there's plenty of people that is completely satisfying for, or even Bulge 81 or Bulge 65 or Time for Trumpet or whatever it is, right? If you have found the game that gives you everything you want out of that topic, then yeah, by all means, don't get any more. But if you still consider yourself a student of the topic and still want to learn new things about that topic, then I think having additional games and trying additional games on the topic is not a bad way to go. I mean, the alternative is buy more books on the topic, and you're going to have exactly the same problem where you're going to see a lot of the same information, probably more. So, all right. So, folks, we are out of time. So we have got a full video schedule this week, even though some of it's live and some of it's recorded and some of it's got to be edited yet, but there should be a bunch of videos out next week. And if I make any progress on the massive pile of editing bullshit that I have in front of me, then you might see a pretty aggressive video release schedule next week as well. There's like unboxings in there, there's interviews in there, there's all kind of stuff. I've been sitting on this open-ended games interview for like a month, and I feel like an asshole because I'm like, oh yes, it'll be up next week, I'll shoot you the link, and it's like a month later and I just shot him the link today. So all right, so we're gonna have more content though. More content's coming. Make sure you tune in tomorrow night. Once again, like the video, thumbs up, whatever it is you're doing on the channel that you're on, or the platform that you're on, subscribe to the channel and all that jazz. There's a bunch of links to help support the show in the video description. You guys have all heard this before. I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight, and we will see you all again super duper soon.